Hey everybody, welcome back to Cityscape Brewing. I'm Dennis Fields, and it is full swing summertime right now. And so we're talking 80 degrees plus outside. You want to have some nice crushable beers on tap for your guest, for yourself, after a long day or after a hot day outside. And one of the things that does that for me is a nice, juicy, hazy IPA. So we're going to be brewing up what I'm hoping is probably my best hazy IPA recipe yet, but it's yet to be seen. There's some things that I haven't used yet. We're gonna be trying out a different yeast that I haven't tried. We're gonna be doing some different ingredients and a little bit different process. This is gonna be a true grain to glass video. We're gonna go through the entire recipe, what's all in there, some things that we're trying out differently. We're gonna go through the brew day process real quick, and we're gonna end up with a cold glass of hopefully the most delicious hazy IPA to date at the end. So hit that like and subscribe button, grab yourself a beer, and we're gonna get after it. So let's go through the grain bill. I have kind of a tried and true grain bill for hazy IPAs. I've done a lot of them, and I think the grain bill is pretty spot on. I think what we've changed up in this recipe is some of the hops that we're gonna be using and the yeast, which is a yeast I've never used. So we're gonna talk about that in just a little bit. But let's first talk about the grain bill. I use 10 pounds of 2-row for my base malt. I have a pound and a half of white wheat in there, which will help give it a little bit of that haziness too, but I also like the flavor of that. And then I have about a half a pound of honey malt. That's gonna give it a little bit of sweetness and help play off some of those citrusy flavors. And the main ingredient in there that's gonna give it the creamy, hazy mouthfeel is the rolled oats. So there's 2 pounds of rolled oats. Again, you don't need to buy those at your homebrew supply store or anything else. You can get those just at the grocery store. Those are just regular old-fashioned oats, right? You don't wanna buy the quick oats, rolled oats. And to make sure that we don't get a stuck sparge, I'm gonna be adding a half a pound of rice hulls. These are your friend.
Rice hulls are your friend.
Those things are going to make sure that you don't get a stuck sparge in your mash. All of these rolled oats and other kind of stickier grain bill ingredients are going to make it a little more difficult to voil off and eventually recirculate your mash. And those rice hulls will prevent that stickiness from you getting a stuck sparge. So very important, use rice hulls. Next, let's talk water profile, okay? This is something that's really gonna help your hazy IPA go from good to great. And so I like to aim for a higher chloride to sulfate ratio than your typical West Coast IPA, which will be like a 3-to-1 ratio. I do about a 2-to-1 ratio. And your water profile is really gonna depend on your specific starting water profile. So you may use RO water, you may use your own tap water and have your water profile, and that's just fine. I really highly suggest putting those into a water calculator that's not as hard as you think to do, and then getting some gypsum, calcium chloride, Epsom salt. That's basically all I really have to add in my recipes in order to get my water really dialed in. So in my case, I use a little bit more gypsum in this one. So going with that 2-to-1 ratio will help you achieve that kind of creamier mouthfeel that will complement really well with the juiciness we're going for in the hops. So let's talk about the hops. It's gonna be your usual suspects that you would wanna have in your hazy IPA. And these are generally because the oil compounds that are found in these specific hops are gonna give us those citrusy, grapefruit, pineapple flavors that we're gonna wanna have come out in our hazy IPA. And then the yeast that we're using that we'll talk about next is gonna help pull out those flavors even more. And so we're gonna be using whole leaf Citra hops. We're gonna be using Centennial, Simcoe. We're gonna use the Cryo Simcoe though, and then we're gonna be using Mosaic. If you do not have whole cone Citra hops, that's just fine to use pellets. You can use them 1-to-1 for what I'm doing in my recipe here. I'll have this entire recipe in the video description below, so you don't need to write everything down. It's gonna be right down there for you with the full instructions on how to brew this thing. For the Cryo Simcoe, we're using those just so we can use half the amount in the boil process and eventually in our dry hopping schedule than using a whole ounce. Cryo hops are just kind of they take some of the vegetal matter out of the hop and you get more oils left over. And so think of it as like double the amount of hop oils in a regular pellet hop. So for 1 ounce of cryo hops, think about having 2 ounces of regular hops. You're just condensing those down in the hops and getting twice the amount of oils. So in a pinch, you don't have to have cryo hops. You can actually use, instead of using a 1/2 ounce, when I'm using a 1/2 ounce of cryo, you can use a full ounce of Simcoe instead of that 1/2 ounce in the schedule if you don't have access to Simcoe cryo. As for the hop schedule, we're gonna be doing these all late additions, right? And so we're gonna start our boil, we're gonna do a typical 60-minute boil after our mash, and we're gonna be adding an ounce of those whole leaf Citra hops and an ounce of Centennial at 5 minutes. We're gonna be doing a 1/2 ounce of Cryo Simcoe, an ounce of Mosaic, and then a 1/2 ounce of Citra, and then another full ounce of Centennial, all in the whirlpool. So we're gonna have a large whirlpool hop addition that's gonna help pull out all those oils and get those things ready for fermentation. And then we have 2.5 ounces dry hopped. One of those is a cryo 1/2 ounce. So it's really like having 3 ounces dry hopped at high Krausen. And those are going to be Mosaic, whole leaf Citra hops again, and then the cryo Simcoe. And we're all gonna be doing that with a new yeast that I'm using. The yeast is Lallemand's Verdant IPA. So I haven't used this one before, and it is a great IPA yeast, but it can be used for hazy IPAs because this is gonna give off some of those fruity esters that we're looking for. And I've tasted regular IPAs that are made with this, and they already taste fruity. And when you're gonna add this to the hazy recipe, I think this thing's gonna turn out awesome. So everybody likes to talk about the typical hazy IPA yeast. So you have London Ale 3, you've got London Fog, you have some others that have come out on the market, but this one is a really lesser known hazy IPA yeast. It's a dry yeast too, so this one will last a little longer than some of your other ones, and you don't need to make a yeast starter for this one. I'm just gonna rehydrate right before I pitch this thing to make sure that this thing gets a little bit of a head start in some warm water, and then we're gonna go ahead and pitch this in our brew. Another couple things that we're going to be doing a little bit differently in the mash are adding ascorbic acid. That's going to help preserve our beer. It's basically vitamin C. We're going to add about 3 to 4 grams of that in our mash. That's going to help reduce the chances of oxidation, and it's going to give our hazy IPA a little bit longer shelf life. And so that's a little trick to the trade. You should actually do that for most ales that you're going to do, like pale ales, IPAs, or hazy IPAs specifically. Those are a little bit more susceptible to oxidation, and this ascorbic acid is going to help ensure that we have a longer lasting, delicious hazy IPA. Secondly, we're going to be adding a little bit of lactic acid to drop our mash pH. We really want to hit that mash pH about 5.3, 5.4-ish, but 5.3 is what we're shooting for. So without further ado, we're going to go get our water additions ready. We're going to mill our grains. We're going to get this batch going. Oh my God, I don't even have a beer. I need to get one. All right, guys, we are ready to mash in. Our strike water is ready, heated up to about 165 because we're shooting for about 154 mash temperature. So let's take a look. Okay, the water in, I already have all my water additions in, but right before I dump in all my grains, that's when I go ahead and I add my lactic acid and my ascorbic acid. So we're going to do that ascorbic acid we talked about and lactic acid, 4 grams of that for myself, but that'll be dependent on your water profile. I have my rice hulls added in here as well, and we'll pour in the rest of the grist. All right, let's get that good mixed up, and we will find my thermometer here in a second and get a mash temp. Getting shooting for about 154. That should give it some good mouthfeel without not being too high to leave a lot of those residual sugars, but 154 should do it. And we are at 153, so I think that's perfect. We're about a degree low. That's not too bad. We're gonna leave it at that. We'll cover that up and we'll be back in 60 minutes. All right, while our mash is doing its thing in here, I'm gonna go ahead and start weighing out our hop additions for our 5-minute addition and our whirlpool hops that we'll be using today. I'm also gonna be weighing out our dry hop additions because I'm gonna be adding those right to the fermenter so I can pull off those sous vide magnets and drop those right at high Krausen. All right, we are gonna start with some whole cone Citra hops. So these things are gonna be absolutely delicious. All right, next we have Centennial hops. And then we're gonna do an ounce of Mosaic, both for our whirlpool hops and our dry hop edition. And last but not least, we are going to do a ½ ounce of Simcoe, both in whirlpool and dry hop as well. All right, as for our dry hopping hops, we're gonna put these things in a sanitized paint strainer bag. I have that thing soaking in there right now. I'm gonna pull that out, we're gonna dry it out. I'm gonna put all of these hops inside of that paint strainer bag. We're gonna tie that closed, and with those sous vide magnets in there, we're going to be attaching this to our fermenter after we rack our beer to it. We're gonna be putting those towards the top near the lid, and then on day one, we're gonna pull those magnets off and let these hops fall in there to do their magic and create all that juiciness flavor. All right, so our mash is done. It's done our 60-minute mash rest, so we're gonna go ahead and give it a good stir up, and then we're going to do our vorlaughing process where I use a recirculation tool. We're gonna do that 3 or 4 times, and we're gonna get our first runnings. All right, time to put in our sparge water. That's sitting at 180 degrees. Give that a good stir and give it another 15-minute rest. All right, guys, I have started heating this thing up. We've collected our full boil volume. We actually are a little bit high on the volume, which is just fine with me because we have a lot of hops going in this thing. And because of that, we're going to be soaking up a lot of those, especially with those whole cone hops that I'm using. So I'm expecting to lose a little bit more volume just because of the amount of hops that we're using in our 5-minute edition and our whirlpool edition. All right, just before boil here, I'm gonna add a little bit of Firm Cap S. That's gonna help prevent boilovers when we get up to a boil and add hops. All right, I'm gonna quick show you guys how I'm gonna prep my hop additions here. These are our 5-minute hops here, which means we are going to be putting those in a paint strainer bag in my DIY hop spider here, right? But before we do that, I'm just gonna pour them directly in the bag before I put it in the hop spider. That way I don't have to pour all these in that small hole. I will have to do that when I get to the whirlpool hops, and that's okay. We'll just carefully pour those in while we're doing our whirlpool, and we'll show you how to do that when we get to that point. So these are our 5-minute additions. We're gonna go ahead, put these right in the hop spider. I'm gonna put this thing up through here, take off the collar, and do that. That way I don't have to pour it in there. So these are ready to be dropped in at 5 minutes, and I can just start stirring them immediately rather than worry about dumping them all in. All right, so this one I actually put on a sanitized lid here just so I don't touch it on anything else. This one's gonna be going in our fermenter when we're done. We're gonna go ahead and take our hops that will be going in our dry hop schedule. I'm gonna pour these things in here. If you were using pellet hops, you could probably get away with a smaller paint strainer bag than this one. But since this one has all these whole cone hops, I wanted to give it enough surface area to kind of move around in that bag, get all them oils out. So what I'm gonna do with this one is I'm actually going to put in 2 sous vide magnets. So these are these blue kind of silicone coated magnets. We're gonna put 2 of those inside of the hops, or hop sack. And the reason we're gonna do that is because we're gonna tie this thing shut, and we're gonna use 2 other ones, because I have 4 of them total, to attach to the fermenter lid. And then when we are ready to, for these things to be pulled off, we're gonna go ahead and pull them off. So in the meantime, I'm gonna roll this thing up as super tight as I can. I'm gonna keep one of these magnets towards the top and one towards the bottom, but on opposite sides of the bag. So I'm gonna go ahead, put one way up here where the knot is, and then I'm gonna start rolling it up. And the other one I'm gonna try to keep as far to the left as I can. My left, your right. So they're on opposite sides. We have 2 of them right there, one here and one over here, right? And then I'm gonna roll this thing as tight as I can so I can put it up on the lid of my fermenter when I get there. All right, guys, we got about 15 minutes left in the boil. I got a little bit of yeast nutrient I'm going to go ahead and add in there. All right, guys, we got about 5 minutes left in the boil, so I'm going to take my hop spider that we already have all of our hops in right here. We're going to go ahead and we're going to slowly put it in this thing so it doesn't boil over. Let them get nice and wet. And we'll watch the temperature if we need to. But that's a lot of hops going in at one time. Normally I wouldn't dump all these hop oils all in there at once, but they're all in the bag. So we're going to go and do that. Just make sure that we're watching the pot so it doesn't boil over. Our firm cap should help do its job there. And in the last 5 minutes here, I am going to pick up this bag a couple of times with my heat pad here and let those oils just kind of drain out of there, get into that wort. And then these are the only ones we're adding during the boil. And we're going to, once we get done with this boil, we're going to start our whirlpool additions by cooling this down to about 180 degrees, pouring all those hops in there, and then letting it sit for about 10 minutes, 10-15 minutes, and then we'll continue cooling it down all the way as cool as we can get it, and then throw it in our fermentation chamber, and then when it gets into the upper 60s, we'll pitch our yeast. All right, we're gonna start our cool down. Again, we are not trying to cool this past, I'm gonna try and shoot, because we have so many hops, for about 190 and see where we're at after we add the hops. But realistically, we want it to be between 170 and 180 degrees. All right, it doesn't take long to get to about 190. So I'm gonna go ahead and shut this off in just a second. I'm gonna put in all those hops. We have quite a few, so that's gonna cool it down anyway. And then we're gonna put a lid on this for about 10 minutes. If a few of them fall into the basket, it's not a huge deal. But I'm gonna try to get most of them in the hop spider. I'm gonna lift up this bag one time. Let those things drain out. Probably do that one more time, but I'm gonna put a lid on here so we can let it sit for 10 minutes. All right, guys, we are just about 170 degrees after about 10 minutes, actually a little bit more than that, probably about 12. And we're gonna get this thing starting to cool back down. So we're gonna turn on our wort chiller, get that thing running. I'm gonna lift this thing up one more time, get these hop oils out of there. And then I'm gonna get our wort chiller back in here. And since it's over 150 degrees, still in this, you shouldn't have to worry about your wort chiller, but if you want to spray it down a little bit with some sanitizer, you can do that. All right, guys, we got our wort cooled down in the 80s anyway. It's going to cool down the rest of the way as we're transferring this in here and as we're putting it in our fermentation chamber. So I'm going to go ahead and start transferring this. This screen here is going to help aerate the wort, but it's also going to catch some of them whole cone hops as they spilled out. So we already got one there. There's going to be a few more, I bet about 6 or 8 of them or so. All right, everybody, and here it is. We have a awesome, hazy, delicious, juicy IPA. This one is one to brew. I will tell you what, I have brewed a lot of hazy IPAs and I've done a lot of great ones, but I will tell you that this one I've actually had on tap for a couple of weeks now, and I actually entered it into 2 homebrew competitions. In the latest one that just came out, the results, I actually got 2nd place on this one, so very, very happy with this one. On the nose, you get all fruit. It's the mango, the pineapples, guava, I mean mostly mango, I think, in this one. That Verdant yeast that we used in this recipe is spectacular. I mean, that is really the kind of showcase. It keeps that nice haze appearance to it and really gives it those fruity esters and things that we're looking for. So going in for the taste, and it's exactly what you would want in a hazy IPA. There's just a little tiny bite, but for the most part, it's really juicy, delicious, great mouthfeel, creamy. This is definitely one that I would say brew. And so if you haven't done a hazy IPA and you've tasted really good ones, or maybe you've tried some recipes but haven't had a lot of success, this one, all of the stuff as always will be down in the video description and you can check that out. This one is one that will be a crowd pleaser all summer long. It's 95 degrees out this side today, this summer, and I'll tell you what, this one is a great beer to come in and have after a hot day. So with that, hit that like and subscribe button. You can always buy me a beer too and help support the channel. That link is in the video description as well. Happy brewing and cheers. Thanks for watching my video. I really do appreciate it. Another couple ways you can support the channel is by hitting that like and subscribe button or by sending a super thanks underneath any of my videos. You can also check out the merchandise in our store and hit the video on the screen right now. You know you want to.